Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the February 2021 meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency Board of Directors, held in public. My name is Stephen Lightfoot and I'm the chair of the board, and my role today is to lead us through the agenda and facilitate the discussion. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I must start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public and it is not a public meeting. It's also important, just for context, to understand that the board is responsible for the strategic leadership of the agency and does not make regulatory decisions on individual products, because that's actually the role of the officials within the agency who work through independent processes and are advised by our independent expert committees. But what the board is responsible for is the strategic leadership of the agency, and that's very much what our agenda is built around today. I should also make you aware that the meeting's been recorded so that we can publish the video on our website and also on our internal intranet site, so that as many people as possible can see the work that we do. Now, I'm delighted today that we're joined by 44 people who've registered to observe our meeting. We've got 20 people who are representing patient groups. We've got 17 members of our own staff and 5 people from the media and other organisations. So welcome to each and every one of you. I'd also like to make a special welcome to Shah Nebrajani, who's the chair of the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, or NICE. One of our key stakeholders who you'll actually see been mentioned several times during this particular meeting. Now, I went and observed Shah's NICE board meeting last month, and so Shah's doing the return trip for us this month. So welcome, Shah, and it's nice to have you. Now, in terms of priorities for today's agenda, the first substantive item will be our Chief Executive's report, and that will give us an overview of the current activities of the agency. And the rest of the agenda is going to be divided into our 4 strategic objectives. So that's enabling healthcare access, it's ensuring patient safety, building a dynamic organisation, and delivering financial sustainability. Now, the paper I want to spend the most time on today is the new innovative licensing and access pathway, which is creating lots of new opportunities. And I also want to make sure that we have enough time to discuss the reports for our 3 new board assurance committees as well. Now, as the board works through the agenda, members of the audience can actually ask questions, and they can do that through the link www.sli.do or Slido, and enter the event code #MHRA Feb21. That was in your initial invitation to the meeting, and that allows us to actually collate the questions into themes so that we can actually answer them as we go through the meeting. Now, our Director of Communications, Rachel Bosworth, will actually collate the questions and ask them on your behalf. So she'll be our mouthpiece, as it were. So Rachel, do you want to give us a wave so we all know who you are? That's great, thank you. I've also allocated the last 25 minutes of the meeting for an open question and answer session so that members of the public can ask questions on any reasonable topic. And if we can't answer all the questions in the time we have available, then we'll certainly commit to answer them by email within the next 2 weeks. So please add your name to any questions that you ask so that we could do that if we do run out of time. Now, while I'm doing the introductions, can I also just go around the video screen and just ask my board colleagues to give us a wave so that the audience can see who we all are. So first of all, June Rain, Dr. June Rain, our Chief Executive. We've got Dr. Sam Atkinson, our Chief Quality and Access Officer. We've got John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer. We've got John Quinn, our Chief Technology Officer. And Dr. Christian Schneider, our Chief Scientific Officer. And then we've also got our independent non-executive directors. So we've got Mandy Calvert. We've got Mercy Jessingham. We've got Anthony Rogers. Professor David Webb.
Morning.
Michael Whitehouse. And Professor Liam Smeeth. So I also want to just take this opportunity to congratulate Liam in particular on being appointed as the new director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. That's a really great news for you, Liam. It's great news for the school. Sadly, it's not such good news for us because of obviously the extra commitments that involves. Unfortunately, that does mean that you're going to need to resign from the board of the MHRA, much to our regret. So this may in fact be your last meeting, but I did want to take the opportunity to thank you for your contributions so far and to wish you every success in your new role, which is going to be right at the centre of the fight against COVID-19. So thank you very much for all that you're doing on that.
Thank you.
The final members of our board are Professor Bruce Campbell, who's been delayed. He'll be joining us in the next hour or so. He's currently attending a Department of Health meeting. And we've also got Dr. Barbara Bannister, who's actually got technical difficulties getting in today. But hopefully we'll be able to join us at some point. Also pleased that we're joined by Ronan MacDonald from our Department of Health sponsor team. So give us a wave, Ronan, thank you. We've got Professor Alison Strath, the Interim Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Scotland. Kerry Chalmers, who's the Senior Policy Manager on Medical Devices in the Scottish Government. And Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Northern Ireland. It's really important that we have our devolved nations involved in these discussions. I'm also pleased to welcome, although we can't see her unfortunately, Fleur Ruder. Now Fleur's taken over from Elizabeth O'Neill as the head of our MHRA legal team. And she brings a really wide range of government legal experience, which includes working on building regulations in the response to the Grenfell tragedy. She's been involved in the enforcement of financial regulations. She's worked on major change programs like the privatisation of Royal Mail. So I think a number of these skills are going to be really valuable to the board and the MHRA as we move forward. So it's great to have you on board, Fleur, and I just hope you can hear this.
Thank you.
And then last but by no means least, we've got Natalie Richards, who's our board secretary. And then we've got people like Jude, Claudine and Erica and Patrick in the background trying to make all this meeting work. So that's the introductions. Have I missed anything? Seeing a stunned silence, so let's carry on. Okay, so in terms of apologies for absence, we've got apologies for lateness from a couple, but hopefully, Barbara's just joined us, just in time, Barbara. So nice to have you. This is Barbara Bannister, one of our non-executive directors. Do we have any declarations of interest? Mandy.
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Yes, I do some consulting in the pharmaceutical sector, and one of my clients is considering using the ILAP process. So as that's on the agenda, I just wanted to make that as a declaration of interest.
Okay, but that's a consultancy arrangement. It's not a direct involvement with the company. Yeah,
that's right, it's a consultancy arrangement, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I know Bruce has also got a declaration, but we'll ask him to make that when he joins the meeting later. Okay, so if we can just move on to the main part of the agenda then. First section of the minutes from the last meeting, so page number 2 in the board pack. Can I just ask, first of all, if there are any issues of accuracy? Can we take them as a true and accurate record of the last meeting? Yes, I'm seeing a thumbs up from David and from Barbara, so I'll take that as a positive. So yes, let's note those as approved. In terms of the actions on page 7, most of the actions are not due, apart from the one on the innovative licensing access pathway, which is on the agenda today. So I think on that basis, the actions are either in process or will be achieved. Is there any other matters arising from the last meeting that we just need to discuss now? I'm seeing again, no sign. So, okay, so that's great. So let's take those minutes and actions as approved and as read. So that brings us on to current context. And this is an important opportunity for June, our Chief Executive, just to provide an update on the current key issues that the agency is dealing with. So June, over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and good morning again, everyone. As you can see, this report does bring together our current areas of focus at the agency and in a way sets the scene for some of the further discussions that we're going to have. It's been a tremendously busy time. There's a lot of detail here, so I'll just highlight some key aspects, perhaps 3 of those, before we open for discussion. The number 1 priority at this moment is healthcare access, and our intensive work on COVID-19 vaccines, variants and tests continues. And we have been preparing a new guideline so that variants to the coronavirus can have associated updates to vaccines in a very prompt and scientifically robust way. And work on therapeutics is ongoing too. The results on tocilizumab, colleagues may have heard about the news release from the recovery trial showing an additional benefit when used with dexamethasone. But importantly, we have a very big focus on our partnerships this month. And by that, I mean partnerships in the healthcare system, building our relationship with NICE in particular, and Scottish Medicines Consortium too, to accelerate safe access. And this isn't just to medicines, it's to software as a medical device, and AI devices, a really exciting time of scientific innovation. And we'll talk more about ILAP in due course. Patient safety, of course, is our priority, and that indeed has been an important aspect of our work this month, because on the 5th of February, we were able to publish in full our surveillance strategy for the vaccines, together with all the safety data, and a very big body of safety data it is too, having had a really good response to the yellow card scheme and the invitation to report. And so there was a key message that the safety profile emerging from all that data carefully analysed is that it is consistent with our clinical trial safety profile. And so we've been able to give a resounding, if you like, word of reassurance that it is a very safe, these vaccines are very safe. Importantly, on the 11th of February, again with patient safety in mind, the bill on medicines and medical devices received royal assent. So it's now an act, and we are at the ready to decorate it with aspects that will improve patient safety, not just registries that I believe Bruce is talking about this morning, but areas of enforcement for devices. And of course, there's a new committee, a devices expert advisory group, further committee that will help us position prompt safety discussions. I think I can't stop though without paying tribute to the amazing work our staff have been doing. And in particularly, despite all the busyness, business as usual, the really, if you like, avid response to the launch of our change programme, one agency delivering for patients. And I think we got close to almost a full house, and we're a big organisation. So that is really a strong, if you like, milestone for us all to be very pleased about moving forward now. And indeed the appointment of our new transformation director, Lavinda Verdi, who is already conveying to every member of staff and managers his approach to transformation. So Chair, there's some messages this month, big milestones, the intensive work on access, safety as a running theme always, but our dynamic organisation preparing to take the opportunities for the future, but only with all the efforts and commitment of our staff. So I'll pause there, Chair, and open up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, June. I must admit, I always continue to be impressed by the sheer breadth of activities that the agency is involved in. It's truly impressive. So thank you very much for that. Okay, let's go to questions. So David, can we kick off with you first, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's on page 10, item 16, in relation to CPRD. And I know that we're going to be looking at CPRD next month. But my thought is that we really need to be thinking big about CPRD. Maybe we're at 15, 20% of the population, but we should be really thinking about 50 to 70% of the population. We're using CPRD to look at vaccination responses. Obviously, the larger the volume of reports we have, the better that database becomes. And there are so many ways in which CPRD is going to feed into the future of MHRA that I really think when we come to this next month, we need to be thinking very big.
Yeah. June, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I can only endorse everything Professor Webb-David has said, because sometimes I think when we have a tremendous asset in-house, we don't always realise how vitally important it is. Thankfully, during the experience of monitoring the safety of COVID vaccines, it's playing a vital role in giving a real-world context to the signal that we might look at. So that is vital. But as we're hearing, it's not only increasing the number of GP practices who are contributing data, but also remembering the longitudinal nature. We go back a very long way, and that's the beauty of the cradle to grave capture of data in the NHS. So it is a vital resource, really looking forward to when we actually dig deep and look at strategic approaches for the future. And I know, as you said earlier, when we celebrated Professor Smeeth-Liam's appointment, there is one avid user here who will probably want to speak to the tremendous utility in that database.
Yeah, Liam, do you want to follow that up actually?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, you know, CPRD has really always shown the way globally and continues to do so. I think it will only ever increase in value, and you know, whether that's COVID and COVID vaccines, but also afterwards as well. And it's going to maintain, you know, it's a real globally leading resource for research on drugs and vaccines, and I think it will continue to be so. So, all strength to it. I see it very optimistic about the future.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Anthony. I know you've been also involved in CPRD from a non-executive perspective as well. So, any additional comments before you ask your other question?
Yeah, I would just say I think you've hit a nail on the head, David. But one of the proposals that you'll see next month is a real opportunity to extend that database even further, and also I can't talk about the numbers at the moment because obviously it's still in place. But the sprint, the speedy patient recruitment into trials, has been approached by several of the major players now to look at having partnerships and pilots on recruitment into the new ways of working on trials, and also some of the CROs. So I think the COVID experience and people's inability to do trials in the way they have has really led people to understand more about the value and actually transfer their budgets to the real world evidence side. So theoretically they knew it was going to be there, but they weren't moving the money to support it. So I think your eyes will be opened in the discussion. But my question was for June on NICE. I had two questions. Quick one on NICE, really just a matter of reassurance, June, because I know I've raised this before, that the previous partnership agreement was very focused on creating the boundaries. You know, we do regulation, NICE do appraisal. And I just wanted a bit of assurance really that the new arrangements and discussions are still heavily focused on partnership and working together. And then my second point was, if any...
Take that one first, actually, if that's okay, just to make it easy for June.
Well, I can give a resounding yes to that. Thank you, Anthony, because it has been a tremendous, almost culture change that we are determined and have learned during COVID, actually, that we can optimally perform only in partnership with NICE and clearly Scottish Medicines Consortium and the other relevant bodies in Northern Ireland, Wales. We have to be always thinking about the outcome of our regulatory decision and maximising that for the public benefit in terms of, you know, effectiveness and safety through our work with NICE. So we'll talk in a little bit about the innovative licensing and access pathway, which again exists as a partnership pathway, just to really show you proof positive at what it can do. But if you want to look at recent experience, the Rapid C19 again is a brilliant example of how we actually can deliver more, and to the extent that we want to see, once a regulatory risk assessment, risk benefit assessment has been done, that is translated into clinical practice without delay, as it was with the dexamethasone. So we've got some metrics, and we shouldn't keep the public waiting for benefit. That will be the proof that our partnership is working.
And it's very much two-way, Anthony, as well, because certainly I know June has regular meetings with Chief Exec at NICE. You know, I'm sort of maintaining good contact with Shah, the chair at NICE. The NICE board meeting last month, you know, MHRA was mentioned several times, particularly around the innovative licensing and working together. So I know it's two-way. And then we've got a four-way chief executive and chair meeting on the 4th of March. So, you know, it is very much moving beyond just boundaries. It has to be about partnership working in its truest sense.
My second one was a quick one, which you may not be able to answer now, but I'm interested in the yellow card reporting, particularly with COVID, because we've got such a massive population and awareness. And perhaps at some stage in the future, we could have a look at where those reports are coming from. I know Rachel and her team have spent a lot of time on social media trying to encourage people to report. And it may be too early to look at where the reports, but whether we've seen a shift so that we're hitting more members of the public and patients directly. If you call people who've been vaccinated patients, I think receivers. And it would be really interesting to understand if we've seen that shift in how we're engaging wider than the clinical community with the yellow card.
Well, certainly it has been a growing trend, And we knew even before we were promoting and advising and encouraging the use of yellow card during COVID, that patients and the public are our biggest reporting group. When we published all the data in relation to the COVID vaccines a couple of weeks back, we actually decided we wouldn't give a breakdown at that point, but further analytical work will be done. And Chair, really happy to bring that back. But again, we're getting more reporting than we expected, and that is largely because the public are responding. And more than that, we have what's called the monitor, where people can actually be joining a cohort. And I think at last count, it was about something like 2 million. So we know that we're reaching out, but we can always do better. And that's where our new system, Safety Connect, comes in. People don't want to lose their, if you like, connection with us. A report doesn't mean it just disappears into a black hole, but we actually have a very responsive system that people can feel they're getting value from their report, even if it isn't a signal, because every report matters. Thank you, Antony. We'll definitely come back with that data, and yeah, happy to take it as an action point.
Okay, thanks, Dave. John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thanks, Stephen. It was just in response to Professor Webb's comment about expanding CPRD data. I think most of the board will know that last year CPRD concluded an agreement with TPP, who are the third of the three kind of GP software providers. So that data is now flowing in considerable quantities into the CPRD database, and crucially also makes our data coverage stronger in the north of England, where historically we've been slightly less comprehensive coverage. So the numbers will certainly be heading dramatically upwards.
Yeah, well, I think CPRD is a strategically important asset for us. It's quite clear. So I think we'll come back to that next month in more detail. Okay, Mandy, how about you? What's your question?
There's a couple of things on two areas. One was the COVID-19 vaccine and therapeutics. I note we're doing, there's a clinical trial being approved for paediatric population. Has there been any trials for pregnant women? I'm just thinking about our response in terms of women's health, and if that's been an area which is still seems to be not covered by COVID.
June?
Yeah, shall I pick that one up? Yes, Mandy's absolutely right. It is a gap, and it's one that we're looking to see how we can address. We're doing that through our links with FDA, who in fact in the international regulatory world have been very active and in fact first required data rather than advising in trials not to study medicines in pregnant women. So that is on the, if you like, to-do list. We're also in touch through our information consortium with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the Royal College of Midwives. And I know that Scottish colleagues have expressed an interest in joining that group, and clearly it's an open invitation to all our devolved colleagues to join. So it's on the to-do list. We are following up with Public Health England exposed pregnancies, women who've had the vaccine, but we do appreciate there's a need for some more robust data. So we're on the case.
Can I just bring Alison into the conversation, actually, Chief Pharmaceutical Officer of Scotland, what's your perspective around, the importance of getting more information and data for pregnant women?
I mean, it is very important. In fact, we had a meeting yesterday with ministers and one of the pharmaceutical companies involved in vaccine production, and they were exactly the sorts of questions we were asking them about, what are their plans for paediatrics, for pregnant women, because clearly, we need that information to inform our thinking. So it's really helpful, the work that June's just described that the MHRA are doing, because equally it's important, I think we try and do that where we can on a kind of four nations basis, because it gives us a much better picture in terms of the data and the numbers, much more robust evidence. So yeah, we're very supportive. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alison. Appreciate that. That's a very good question, Mandy. So does that go some way to answer your concern?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Was there a second question you said? I think you said you had two.
Yes, there was. The other one was on levothyroxine, and it was more of a general question around generics and originator drugs. in terms of, are we doing sufficient if there are differences between back to industry, particularly to prove bioequivalence? It seemed a really important piece in terms of patient safety to understand the equivalence.
Yeah, June?
I couldn't agree more, and it's only when we get, this is again, patient reports, we realise that even if we have rather precise and robust bioequivalence data, there may be other factors. We've seen it with levothyroxine here, but also in New Zealand and in the Netherlands. And we've charged our expert committees with, getting stuck in and looking at this a bit more. It's not easy to unravel, actually, but I think in the end, it's the patient-public perspective that forms the picture that we need to react to. And therefore, the advice, it has to be, for most people, the bioequivalence data assures that you can switch. But if anyone doesn't feel right, and it's very often in the area of endocrine, as we see with levothyroxine, that they shouldn't switch. That's as far as we've got. If there are more, I would think perhaps scientific approaches to this, particularly with perhaps pharmacogenomics, that might be a way to go. So in a way, it's a bit of an issue still to do more on, but the advice is as it is in the meantime.
Okay, no, thank you. I think that sort of reinforces the importance of getting the patient engagement,
Absolutely.
Particularly with those drugs. I think that has an impact on our approach to regulation. No, thanks, June.
Yeah, generics are a critical part of the NHS provision of medicines, and so trying to make it easy to bring generics into the market and make sure they're safe and appropriate for use is a critical activity for us. There's no question of that. Barbara, you had your hand up and you've taken it down. Have you changed your mind, or would you like to come back?
I had a related question also about COVID vaccine safety.
Mm-hmm.
It's been an enormous amount of work and a special part of the yellow card system, and also CPRD's healthcare usage data. And it's increasing, of course, at the moment with more vaccines and more vaccinations. I just wondered, it's such an attractive and effective system, whether we shall be able to find the resources to carry this forward with the operational transformation of the MHRA systems.
Thank you very much. As colleagues will be aware, we're looking very much at a life cycle approach, and we'll talk more about that as we take it forward. But the optimizing of our new Safety Connect is a vital part of giving the very best attention, even if we're testing the system to its limits with the volume. I think we get a yellow card in so many seconds. They're coming in so thick and fast that we have to have a system that works in real time. And I think it's not unrealistic to say that we have been running ahead. I think of other jurisdictions, the planning that took place from last June onwards to scale up and to use a certain amount of automation in terms of capturing data, not in scientific analysis, but in how the data are very quickly put into a system that we can actually analyse very regularly. And now we've got the weekly reports. So the question, where does this sit for our future? Well, it's centre stage for our future, to be seen as being a real-time vigilance regulator, because that's what the public expect. And therefore, when we have an issue that's quickly identified, we can investigate it, refute or confirm it. And we're always ready to look at something that might be very rare. But having said that, I think the important message from COVID is that everything looks like what we expected at the moment, in terms of pretty mild and perhaps short-lived types of adverse reactions. Not to say they're not important, but they are not serious.
Can I just follow up on that, June? And obviously you did there was the briefing session that was done, it was televised. What's the plans in terms of continuing to update that information, just so that everybody's aware?
Yeah, weekly, Thursday. There'll be a report this Thursday. And we've got our expert groups geared into that periodicity. So there's an independence. It's not simply our own assessors. you can imagine assessors who are seeing a very large amount of data, some of which is repeating kind of the themes and the scientific findings that we know about. So that layer of independence that's always checking and looking and asking more questions is vital. The other aspect is looking ahead to more robust, if you like, studies even now. And again, we know the Open Safely study from the London School of Hygiene is to be looked forward to, and there are other bodies who are looking into the data in an independent and, if you like, epidemiologically robust way. Not that we don't value the signals from a case report, of course we do, but we must look at other complementary sources of evidence, always to be able to answer that question. Today, is this safe? Today we're saying yes, but we need to always keep our eye on that ball.
I think the regularity of the communication is an important commitment, June, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was fully aware that that was the case, because I think that's exactly the right thing to be doing. Okay, I think we've probably exhausted those questions. Could I maybe just raise one topic that's not on your report, June, and that actually is the whole area of EU transition. And I'm just conscious we've got Kathy Harrison online today, and I just wanted to check with Kathy from the Northern Ireland perspective. Is there anything else that you think that as an agency we need to be doing to help the flow of medicines into Northern Ireland? Because obviously with the challenges of the protocol and other such issues, I just wanted to have the opportunity for you to give us an update.
Stephen, thank you. And it has been an exceptionally busy period for us since the beginning of January. We've worked very, very closely with MHRA on a number of issues as they've arisen. And the majority of issues that have come up have been, at this moment in time, been mainly relating to the supply chain and trader readiness. Yeah. But there are other areas that we are starting to see emerging that we're working with MHRA on currently. So I think that this is, we're at the start of a new way of working, and I'm not going to say doesn't feel like a new normal yet, but we're moving towards a different longer term changes. We are relying very heavily on the agency in terms of the need really to continue to ensure Northern Ireland's position in terms of equity of access, particularly in licensing of medicines. And there are still some issues that we're working through with the EU.
Yeah, well, we want to be very much part of the solution, Kathy. We want to support Northern Ireland just as much as any of the other nations. So continue to keep leaning on us and ask for any help that you think you need. That's great. Okay. Alison. So can I bring you into the conversation?
Thank you. And whilst I really appreciate that, obviously Kathy's issues are far greater, I think, in terms of the impacts of the end of transition period and the flow of medicines. It was just a flag that, we've actually just recently come across an issue in Scotland about a brand new treatment, which was just accepted and just getting it across because it was due to come in via Dublin, and so we've equally hit a kind of issue about the kind of travel of that product in to the UK. So, I think it is something we need to probably continue to keep an eye on and just kind of understand some of those impacts, particularly maybe with some of the new products as we start to look at those kind of flows across the border. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alison. I think this is really helpful. June, do you anything you want to respond to that?
Yes, I realised as we started the meeting and I looked to see that there wasn't a further update from last month, but absolutely the task force is working pretty hard and it needs examples to really test where we are. That's why Alison's point is an important one. But Kathy, as you know, I'd like to say thank you to your team too. We're on the case. I think it's been called snagging, but it's more than that, to absolutely make sure that the systems that we've created work in practice. And we're now in the phase of looking longer term through the transition and to make sure that we do reach an equitable state that everyone in Northern Ireland can expect to have the same choices and the same availability as in the rest of the UK, given where the protocol is now. So very, very much a live issue, Chair, and I'm grateful to you for raising it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Alison, did you want to come back, or is that an old hand? Can I just check? That's fine. Okay, so I think that's exhausted the questions from the board. Rachel, can I just check if there are any questions from members of the public?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. There are a few questions from the public, all of which relate to COVID vaccines. Would you like to take those now?
Why don't we take an odd one now, and then we can come back to any others that are related in the Q&A session at the end.
Okay, well, let's just take the first one that came in then, which is a question asking, what are you going to do differently to swiftly authorise tweaked or new vaccines created for variants? And are you introducing a new process to deal with this?
Well, certainly we're well aware that with the threat posed by particularly a pathogenic or a seriously harmful variant, we need to act fast. So it won't be a full rerun of the first vaccine approvals. It will be very modified and very focused and very much quicker. We do have a model, which is the updates to flu vaccines that happen every year, but we do need to act even faster. So as I mentioned earlier, we're preparing what the scientific basis of those updates would be, and Dr. Christian Schneider might say a word about that. But actually the important question, the second question, is what's the regulatory pathway? And it will be a very slimmed down and agile pathway to make sure that the public can have confidence that as soon as we can do it, the effective vaccines against the variants are available. We're not doing this on our own. We're clearly working with other international regulators, including the World Health Organization. So it's a very important priority, and we're hoping that, particularly with the intensive work which industry is undertaking, that we'll be standing up our new pathway very soon. But Chair Christian might want to say something.
Christian, do you want to add on any experience from what you do with flu every year, or the flu vaccines?
Thanks, thanks, Chair. And thanks for the question. This is indeed an important question. So indeed, we can, to a certain extent, learn from flu, seasonal flu. So basically, the virus does not change that much that you would have to consider an already authorized vaccine a new vaccine. So you can come with a more focused, consolidated assessment of data that also enables a swift change and development. Because if that would take too long, any vaccine update would come too late for the next influenza season. So indeed, as Dr. Rain has said, we can learn from this. Our thinking is very consolidated, I would say. We are currently discussing this with experts. Of course, we have to balance this a bit because for COVID-19 vaccines and the coronavirus is still a new virus. So we don't have that much experience as with influenza, but still we are developing a way of regulating these updates with the view to have a swift development and approval that is on time for new variants arriving without compromising quality, safety and efficacy, of course.
That's great. Well, thank you for both of you. That's a really important question. I hope that gives it some confidence that, we not only understand what needs to be done, we're actually very prepared to do it as well. So. Okay, I'd like to just say thank you, June, to you and the entire MHRA team for the huge amount of work that you're continuing to do in at times very difficult situations, but very, very proud of all the work that's been done. So thank you for that. Before we just move on to the next item, can I just welcome Professor Bruce Campbell, our non-executive director. I mentioned him at the early stages of the meeting to say that he was delayed due to a meeting with the Department of Health. So hopefully that's gone well, Bruce, because you're still smiling. But I also know that you wanted to make a declaration of interest, so now might be a good time to do that, if that's okay.
Well, I apologise for my repeated declarations of interest. My lateness today was in fact related to my declaration of interest last month, which was advising for a company who are bidding for digital work in the new medical device arena of NHSX. I wanted just to declare this month that I've been asked to give some advice to a company called Aerosol Shield, who make make a transparent kind of a cover tent which goes over the head and shoulders of people who've collapsed or who are in hospital, and it's unknown whether they've got COVID. And the design is such that healthcare workers get an extra layer of protection when they're dealing at close quarters with people and they don't know if they are infected. In fact, by the definition, this is not a medical device, but because of its nature, I felt it was proper to make a declaration.
That's great. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for all that you're doing. That's on all these other activities too. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning that one of the key items today was to talk about healthcare access and how does the innovative licensing access pathway fit into the future regulatory offer of the agency. So, Sam, you can assume that the paper's been read, but I think it's appropriate just to highlight a few key points before we open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much, Chair, and absolutely I will assume it's been read because I'm afraid it was a little bit lengthy, so apologies for that, but I thought the context and detail was quite helpful under the circumstances. So as has been said, I mean, you mentioned it as being a partnership pathway, and I think that's absolutely right. It's supposed to be something that's a little bit different, something that's certainly forward-looking. The objectives, I think, around this are very much around reducing time to market, so this is through the regulatory toolkit, responding to the independent medicines and medical device safety review, so all around better patient engagement, which I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on in a moment, developing and attracting, I guess, new business to the UK as well as another reason for the new pathway. The framework's been very much established that has a number of different things through it, so the innovative medicines designation, so the innovative or innovation passport as it's called, a flexible toolkit, so this is very much regulatory and scientific mechanisms to support the process, and integrated development roadmap, so a target development profile. So all of these really form part of that whole pathway. I think in the paper, figure 3 quite helpfully depicts the process, and on page 5, the table there shows the comparison to other schemes, which again, looking at the broader portfolio that we actually have in terms of products and services, that's quite a helpful assessment. But I think ILAP overall really does provide greater engagement with stakeholders, as I said, the partnership pathway, but it also provides a lot more engagement, and it's designed to really engage patients and ensure that experiences and the patient voice is actually embedded in the decisions that the organisation makes, obviously leading to the earlier access. So if I may just touch on a couple of the tools. I mean, we're talking about CPRD, and I wasn't going to mention this, but just because of the conversation earlier, I will just highlight that one of the tools is very much around clinical trial recruitment through CPRD, which is ongoing and has been used quite successfully through the COVID pandemic. And there's also a future tool that's currently being looked at and considered, which is more around a virtual control group tool. So there are things that I think CPRD can bring to this particular pathway, and indeed be a very positive benefit for the organisation and indeed those that want to use the services we have. The other tool that I wanted to touch on, which is a very important one, which is the enhanced patient engagement tool. This is really around effective and active collaboration of patients, patient advocates, representatives, or indeed carers in processes and decisions along the whole life cycle. So the tool is very much, I guess, co-developed with our partners, so with the likes of our colleagues in NICE and SMC, so the Scottish Medicines Consortium. And it really does provide opportunities throughout the whole of the pathway for companies to really consider the patient voice and experience within their development process. It definitely will, I think, help develop the innovative product, and it will also allow for patients to actually add their perspective to those risks and benefits around the products. So the passport holder, so the innovation passport that I talked about earlier, has a requirement to actually flag whether or not they've already been engaging with patients, what they plan to do, how they want to engage, what the benefits are through different engagement activities and the like. So there is quite an expectation on the passport holder. But in order to support that, we're also providing a lot of support throughout the process. So whether that's showing them how they can best integrate patient-reported outcomes into the process, or whether it's around providing support for the patient information leaflet or summary of product characteristics, for example, and making sure that there is appropriate content within those. So we're certainly providing that post-market support too. So I think there's a lot that can be said around that area, and for me it's really really an important area of the toolkit, along with all of the others that are obviously listed in the paper. But I thought it was worth just touching on, just to conclude, really some of my thoughts in terms of the questions and priorities going forward, and that might provoke a little bit of debate. I'm just at the moment taking over the senior responsible ownership of this particular project, and it's been quite a useful moment to reflect on where we're up to and where we want to go strategically from here. So I think ironing out and confirming and finalising the measures of success, which we're engaging with our colleagues at NICE at the moment, and getting an aligned position on those is really key. I'm really interested to look at market demand for this. So far we've had somewhere in the region of 10 or 11 applications, which is probably slightly higher than we expected for this point in time. But I think we do need to understand that, and also the impact of the definition of innovation, because obviously that will determine the market demand to some extent. I'm equally interested in the impact of our exit from the EU and the uptake of the reliance route, and what impact that will potentially have on companies being interested in ILAP. I think there's also something around that flows from that, a question on ensuring that the pathway is sustainable and financially affordable, I guess, going forwards. We obviously need to ensure that continues. And then, as the question asked, you know, where does this fit strategically with the other products and services that we have, like EAMS? And how do we make that a catalogue that is understandable and comprehensible to our partners outside and to stakeholders who are interested in using the different products? Do we still need them all? And I think these are strategic questions that I really want to get under and pull together. And I think at some point it would be useful to come back with some thoughts around that, but certainly would welcome a discussion on those points. And I think lastly is really the international engagement and the collaboration with partners across the health system in the UK too is going to be key to actually really moving us forward in the right direction strategically. So Chair, I'll leave it there if that's okay, but I hope that gives a bit of a flavour of where we're up to and also the direction of travel.
Yeah, I think that's great. Bear in mind, this was only launched 6 weeks ago, officially. You know, the fact we've had 10 applications, and I understand we've also had our first passports being granted. So, you know, I think that feels like a very, very positive start from my perspective. So again, thanks to the team that have worked very hard to get this up and running. So, okay, David, you've done a lot of work in research. So what's your take on this particular proposal?
Well, so first of all, I should say I think it's wonderful. It's really important. It's definitely a key part of the future, and I like the way it's shaping up. I did have 3 questions, if I'm allowed 3 questions.
Keep asking, I'll tell you when to stop.
Okay. So, well, first of all, I looked at the 3 criteria for going through this system, and I certainly, they seem reasonable. But when you look at what came before and what's here now, the term unmet need is no longer included. And I like the term unmet need. It can also be, you know, used in different ways by companies to make their claim, but it forces them to offer what's special about the medicine. So that's probably just a question, but I wondered why that term was no longer used.
Sam, do you want to just pick that one off first?
I've got to say that the criteria was developed before I got involved in it, so I would imagine that it went through the normal routes of engagement with others like our NICE colleagues. But Christian is putting his hands up because he was actually looking after the ILAP at this point in time, because it spun out of the Tiger team, as you may recall.
Of course.
So if I may pass over to Christian, because he probably has a bit more information on this. Thank you.
Christian, can you help us with that one?
Thanks, of course. And just to say that I'm very pleased, obviously, about the way that ILAP has gone from the early days of the Tiger team. Just for colleagues listening who don't know what a Tiger team is, that term was from the Apollo 13 mission, where a team of undomesticated, uninhibited technical specialists were asked to track down relentlessly every possible source of failure in a spacecraft subsystem. And what we have done is we had looked at the time of where licensing procedures could actually be made much better, faster, and we took all things that we have ever heard from and that we thought would be useful, also from with input from industry into this. And this is how the kind of prototype of iLab was created, which is now moving towards quality and access, which I think is the logical step. And just to come back to the question, at the time we thought that there might be medicines or maybe devices where there is not necessarily in the strict sense an unmet need, but still an importance. So for example, we could argue if antibiotics, for example, are an unmet medical need, because there are antibiotics on the market, but still antibiotics in the time of antimicrobial resistance are a significant clinical problem. So with usual criteria, it might be difficult to route certain medicines into that pathway, and we wanted to be more inclusive and more permissive with the pathway. And this is for me one of the main reasons why the term unmet need is not featuring, which is more for the other pathways that we have.
Okay. David, does that convince you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. If it's in that spirit, then I'm perfectly happy with it. So my next question was about the work of SMC and NICE. So I wondered how they were going to work together, or whether they were going to be divvying out the workload between them, and just make the observation that for single technology appraisal in the past by NICE, it's been a substantially slower process than the appraisals by SMC, and how that's going to be married up in a way that's successful.
Okay. Sam, can you take that one, or to start with? Or?
As far as I'm aware, the relationship with NICE and SMC is working very effectively, and we're engaging at the various different points of the pathway. I mean, again, Christian may well want to comment on this, but I don't necessarily see that there's any challenges with this at the moment. It's actually, I think, a positive demonstration of where the different parts of the system are working very effectively.
Yeah. Okay, Christian, do you want to add anything?
No, thanks. I can confirm that. So indeed, the collaboration works very well, and is obviously an important step. We cannot provide fast yet safe access to patients when we don't have all the relevant players in the system on board, and this is what we have with this.
Yeah. Okay.
So that wasn't quite an answer to the question, which is how the work's going to be done between those groups. But maybe that's something you're still thinking through, because NICE and SMC will either have to share the workload or work together, and I presume lines of working for health technology.
Why don't we take that one offline, David, and just complete the loop on that one rather than.
Chair, I wonder if I might just come in because my division sponsored the Scottish Medicines Consortium side of things. So just if it's helpful, I mean, I think, and I know Professor Webb would ask a very good question around this, as he is a past chair of the SMC, so he understands a lot about the processes. So I think we are probably at a very early stage. In particular, ILAP, I think, will be really helpful in terms of it's almost that precursor to the SMC and NICE HTA processes. I guess we, as there are reviews going on in particular right now around the NICE kind of process, I think there's opportunities for us to think about how we collectively work going forward, but certainly in terms of the work of the actual ILAP process, my kind of understanding, although I'm not obviously directly involved, is that that there's a kind of share of work being done between the kind of interested parties. And I know we certainly are making an investment in SMC to bolster their capacity a little bit to help support with that, given you're right, we do review every single newly licensed medicine through the SMC process. So there are quite substantive workloads and quite a small team already, but we are really keen to invest in the ILAP process, and we can see lots of benefits in terms of actually by working with companies upstream, we'll get the benefits of that when it comes to the HT process downstream, and in particular for some of us with additional pathways. So we have an ultra-orphan pathway in Scotland, and actually that work with companies to help them think about patient-reported outcomes, etc., again upstream, I think will be beneficial to some of our other kind of processes that we have. So we're really encouraged and very, very supportive of the work, and very grateful to the MHRA, I think, for ensuring a kind of equal partnership between, you know, the key health technology assessment bodies in this, because that kind of handshake between the two will be really important, and we see this as something that we'll continue to build and work on. Thank you.
Maybe, David, could I make a suggestion that maybe, I don't know, in say maybe 4 months' time, we just take a review of how things are working and bedding out, because that might be the time to pick up those sorts of issues, if that's okay. Also, I know you had a third question, but could I bring somebody else into the conversation? If I've got time, I'll bring you back in for your final question. So Mercy, you've been waiting very patiently. Can I bring you into the conversation, please?
Thank you. And maybe I can just comment on the last thing. Certainly at NICE, we had the scientific advice kind of a service where we were kind of involved. When I was on NICE, we were involved at an early stage. So maybe, as Alison said, this is where that overlap can happen. It's obviously a bit different from that early scientific advice, but I can see that it kind of links into it. I've got two questions too. I hope I'm allowed.
Go on.
Right, my first one, Sam, and you might not be able to answer it off the top of your head, which was really, on those 10 applications, how much were patients involved in kind of assessing need and research questions? Do you know at all? And if you don't, you know, obviously it would be great to get some feedback at some point on how those applications went.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have the detail to that level. Like I said when I was sort of presenting the paper, I mean, it's very much part of an expectation that there's been a lot of patient involvement throughout, but the specific details of the 10 cases, I'm afraid I don't have to hand.
Yeah, it might be a useful topic for your patient safety and engagement committee, actually, to really delve into that in a bit more detail than we maybe could at a board, Mercy.
Exactly, because we are looking at ILAP really to show how, you know, through that whole pathway, patient engagement and involvement actually works and things. So it'll be good to know how the start has gone. On to my second question, really, which is a bit more kind of general about the kind of cost benefits for companies, really, to be involved in this scheme. You know, what's their incentive, and has kind of work been done on that cost benefit to companies on using this and seeing the benefits of it? And I guess apart from that, has any calculations been made on what this might kind of save them in cost and time to use this kind of way of working?
Sam?
Yeah, thanks for that. Excuse me. Page 8 actually gives some sort of detail in terms of the cost to the company. What I'm also interested to look at actually is not just cost to the company, but cost to us. So are we actually covering costs? But that's a slightly different matter. But I think there's a number of different benefits. The early access to market certainly will provide some financial benefits to the companies as well, which obviously will be very positive. And I think there's also something around having a bit of a reputational boost from going through ILAP. I think there's a number of different things that really is making this route attractive, and we are seeing that compared to other accelerated routes around the globe, that actually ours is much more attractive than these other ones, because of the, I guess, the breadth that we define innovation, the criteria that we're setting, those sorts of things, and just by the very nature that we're seeing so many applications already, I think that demonstrates the benefits are there. Whether we ought to probably should do a little bit more investigation around the financial benefits for industry, I think that's probably worth looking at in a little bit more detail. But I guess also we need to understand what that market demand is going to be, and whether the effort of doing that is going to be worthwhile. So it's a bit of an evolving picture, I'd say, at the moment, Mercy. It's one of those things that we are learning how it's going at the moment. So new in its launch. So, you know, I think we just need to see where we get to.
I think we do need to come back to that, Sam. I think it's going to be really important, not just in terms of the cost to industry, but the cost to us, how this is funded, making sure it's a sustainable process, how it then fits into the wider regulatory framework and options that we're offering. But I think it's absolutely right to pilot this and to get as much experience as we can in the next sort of, I suggested 4 months, it might be 5, might be 6, but that sort of time. Then I think that might be a good time to have that sort of in-depth discussion around how we make sure this is a financially sustainable model. And it's something we might want to talk to Ronan and his colleagues at Department of Health about as well, because this is an important part of the innovation agenda for the government too. And I think we will need some support, quite frankly, to help to make this sustainable. Okay, Mercy, were they both your questions?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you for that. Michael, can I bring you into the conversation?
Yes, Stephen, thank you. And it's really building on the point that you just made. I mean, this is really, really brilliant. I suspect my only interest is it's only a couple of months in, but are we seeing any difference in our resourcing model? So if it's a lot of work done earlier on, is it more volume intensive in terms of the requirement of input from MHRA people? Is there a different skill requirement? Is there any evidence of that at the moment? Because it's very relevant to the change programme, I think, going forward.
Yeah, really, really valid question, actually, Michael. Thank you for that. So I think what's interesting with this is we almost got forced to use some of the tools like the rolling review, for example, through the COVID vaccine. So that's been quite helpful to give us quite an early insight into the model. And the work that is now happening on the ILAP submissions, then yes, again, we're sort of following a similar path. I would say that yes, the model shifted. It sort of expedited the process, so it's bunched up the need. So the level of resource that you need at the early part is actually it feels more. But I think if you were to spread it out over the period of time, it's going to be about the same. If anything, possibly slightly less, because there are areas that there's overlaps in terms of the work. So the inspectors and assessors are actually working much more cohesively, and to do that saves time across the board, if that makes sense. So you're not sort of doing it in a very disjointed, disaggregated way. So I think what we will find when we do a bit more analysis is that while it is front loaded, overall it's probably slightly less. But it is a model that we need to be looking at. And the piece of work I'm doing with licensing colleagues at the moment is looking at the fees we're charging and ensuring that the capacity and resource load that we're using is actually a sustainable amount. So it's covering costs, for example. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing that we need to really assess. But I hope that sort of gives you a picture.
No, that's fine. That's what I could. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. Mandy, can I bring you in, please?
Thanks, Stephen. Some of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked, so I'll
Great minds think alike, Mandy.
Sorry?
Great minds think alike.
Yes. One of the things that is sort of a bit of a controversial question, why wouldn't this be our only route for innovative medicines or new chemical entities? It's one question. And the other is, have we thought about how this could help access through maybe mutual recognition, memorandum of understanding with other regulators? Because companies are typically global. If they want to come to the UK, they'll want to know how that also, because the UK is a relatively small market, that opens up access beyond our borders.
Okay, Sam, any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the table on page 5, it does sort of talk about some comparisons, but equally, the part of the toolkit is actually the access to Orbis, for example, or indeed to the access consortium. So, I mean, there are opportunities for, so I'm answering the second part first. There are opportunities in this to actually get involved in and get access to wider markets through the toolkit. So I think that's already in train, and I think there are greater opportunities that we could explore for that. And again, I think that will evolve. In terms of your first question, why isn't it just the only way? I would say that this is a bit of the strategic kind of assessment that needs to be done, or a bit of a review, because the other routes have different benefits and different opportunities. So EAMS, for example, is, they don't charge for, it's a complementary product effectively for specific targeted patients. So there are different reasons why they would potentially go down different routes. And they're based on different regulatory clauses as well. So, that there are differences between them. And I think we need to really unpick them to work out whether there are benefits or risks about leaving them where they are and having multiple routes, or whether it's better to have one route. And that's why I'd like to do that strategic piece of work on what catalogue we should have in place going forwards to make sure we have the most attractive offer for the UK.
I think that's exactly the right discussion to have, Sam. I guess my only question is when. When would be the right time to? When do you think we'll have enough experience around ILAP and then the headspace to start making those trade-offs? Because it doesn't make sense to make it so complicated. It actually puts companies off because they don't know which route to go. So
completely agree. I mean, I'm starting to think about that already. I'd like to get the analysis done on the how much it costs, and then that sort of whole financial model done, which is happening now, as I say. So I don't think that will take too long. I think some discussions over the next month or two, I think, would be possible from a sort of strategic perspective, and the headspace to do that as well. So a couple of months maybe. Yeah.
June, can I just bring you in, June, just in particular of where you see us being able to have this strategic decision on, what's the USP for the agency, and then how does this feature as part of that? I'm not asking for the answer. I'm just thinking when, from a time.
There is a live debate. I'm with Mandy on this one. It should be the way for novel products. It's why we've expanded the definition of innovation in response to David's question, because if we restrict to unmet need, it is quite narrow. And if we actually say that any innovation, it might be a new combination, it might be for COPD, who knows? But if there is a pull through to the NHS and the big saving is time, and for industry, that's important. For the NHS, that's important. So I think the strategic discussion, as Sam has said, around getting the financial modelling, but as part of that, looking to see if this is the mainstream, that this is the way we will work because of its huge advantage in time, in access, in patient outcomes. And the pilot, because it's helped us, we're now hitting the ground running. Your question about time, Stephen, I think we should get some answers about this relatively soon, and I would say in the next month or two, because we need it. And if that's going to be through our change programme, that is our UK way of authorising novel products. And as has been hinted, we can use that with the Access Consortium, who we're now fully operationally involved with. Then I think it's a win-win-win for industry, for patients, for the NHS. But we're gathering experience, as Sam has said, but now is the time, and this discussion is great, to open up our minds to what this potential is. And as we've said in COVID, from recent experiences, this is the way we should do things. So very exciting indeed, and really hats off to the team Sam's leading, Christian, who's done the pre-work with the Tigers, because I think we've now got it within our grasp that could be a whole new way of regulating novel products.
Yeah, I just think we need to build enough time in to have discussions with our stakeholders too, so particularly with NICE and FMC, because this needs to be, it's a partnership model, so I think we need to have a clear idea of what suits the agency, but we then need to share that and debate and make sure it works for the system. So that might need just a little more time, but it sounds like that 3 to 4 month period might not be a bad time to be having this discussion. So, from my point of view.
From April or thereabouts, a full experience, financial modelling, and look at the potential. We've always said we would envisage at least half of the CHMP products going through this route. And the big advantage, the big success measure is time into clinical use, which is why our partnership with NICE and Scottish Medicines Consortium is so important.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, thank you, Mandy, for sort of, that's a really good, helpful question, actually. Thank you for that. Bruce, can I just bring you in?
Thank you. Just a very brief comment and question regarding patient engagement, which is clearly a very important aspect of this, and Sam's emphasised it. But I was just concerned that in the actual document about this, I started reading on page 1, patient engagement, and in the body of the document, there was really nothing. And I got to the appendix, and suddenly there was a tool But if you're presenting this to anyone or to the world in the future, just a bit more about the precise intentions and mechanisms of patient engagement, I think is actually very important. And related to that, the steering committee, with the emphasis on patient engagement, is there a lay member on the steering committee?
Do we know the answer to that one, Sam?
I'm not sure I do, actually. I'd need to get back to you on that one, Bruce, to be honest.
The answer is yes, Sam. And if there isn't, there should be. I think it's probably what Bruce is sort of suggesting. But,
yeah, and I think that's right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd need to get back to you.
Yeah, that's fine. But I think actually this sort of reinforces what I mentioned in Mercy's question as well. Actually, I think it would be useful for the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee to actually have a sort of more in-depth review of the patient involvement and engagement in the ILAP process. To again, and Bruce, you're a member of that committee, so as is David. So that would enable that more detailed discussion, and some further input could be opportune, I think. So thank you for that. Barbara, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, my question is on a different issue, which is also mentioned early in the discussion, and that's conflicts of interest. It's a thing which occupies quite a lot of time and thought with the MHRA because of the great pains needed to ensure that one medicine or device or company isn't favoured over another in any considerations. And there's a sentence which says careful attention is given to conflict of interest. It might be too soon to go into this at length so early in the evolution of the system, but I just wonder how the conflicts of interest are considered in the process and in the pathway, and how arising conflicts of interest might be considered and who would take an overview of them. And also, as with COVID, it's quite likely that there'll be numbers of applications for a similar need or illness over a short space of time. And how will you sort out which ones qualify and which don't, or will you do them all?
Okay, Sam, there's a number of questions there, but just in terms of the principles of conflicts of interest, is there anything else you can add on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we take conflicts of interest and confidentiality, actually, they're both very important to us as a regulator, and we need to make sure we manage them appropriately. We need to also obviously make sure people can express their views, especially if they're coming from patients, so that we can actually hear these views. But I would say that at the moment there's a governance structure in place, and we're considering how things like conflict of interest and confidentiality can actually be managed appropriately, and that's being discussed at those levels within those governance structures. And I think if there was a conflict at the moment, it would probably go up through those routes. And we also have obviously agency policy in dealing with that, and indeed, as you know, a conflict of interest group. So I think it depends on the level of conflict potentially, but I think the processes need to be further developed to make sure that they really are robust and appropriate for the different circumstances. We are learning, I would say, with this whole process. So it's something that will improve over time. The second part of your question was in terms of the different products that might come through for similar need. I think each one will be looked at in their own right against the criteria and the merits of actually taking it through the pathway. But as has been said, the definition has been drawn fairly wide, and I think it's really about making the appropriate decision on a case-by-case basis. So I think we'll have to see what comes through, to be honest, and see where we get to.
Okay, I think if we pick, if we have this review in 4 months' time, I think actually keeping coming back to that, we've got the practical experience then, which we can obviously take into account. And I think if there's still concerns, I think we can then address them at that point. So, Barbara, if you're okay with that, that would be great. Anthony, do you want to ask the last question on this particular topic before we need to move on?
Thank you. It's just to actually build on that last point. I know that we're well aware of it, but this is with the partnership nature of this, I think we also need to be conscious of potential for capture as part of conflict of interest. And we might need to look at the training we're giving our staff in that area. NICE, I know, have done a lot of work on this, and I know the MHRA has in the past. But so it's more a comment than a question, Sam, that we perhaps build that into the training programs for people as well and for their consideration.
Okay, that's great. Okay, we could keep talking about this for quite some considerable time, but I think we'll probably draw a pause there. I think the two key actions that have come out of that discussion, Natalie, just for the minutes, is I think we'll ask the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee to do a detailed review of the patient engagement and involvement processes within ILAP. I think that will be a helpful route of assurance for the board. And then say in 4 months' time, let's have a sort of a more detailed review of ILAP, not only from its operations, but I think very much about how it strategically fits into the agency's model, and also about how we can ensure it's financially sustainable. I think they're the sort of the key components: is the operations, it'd be strategic fit, and it would be around financial sustainability from our point of view. But thank you for introducing a really good topic there, Sam. I really appreciate that. We may well have some questions on this, but I think, Rachel, I think we should probably move on, and we'll try and pick those up later if that's okay. For members of the audience, there's been a couple of mentions on the chat function, just to say that you can raise questions through Slido, www.sli.do. So it's hashtag MHRA Feb21. So if you do want to raise any questions, we'll try and pick them up later if we possibly can on this topic. Okay, if we can then move on to another key area for the agency, it obviously is about ensuring patient safety. We've set up a new Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. It's had its first meeting in the last sort of few weeks. And Mercy, as the chair of that committee, do you want to just say a few points about your report, please?
Yes, certainly. So as you said, we had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the main area of topic really was the patient and public engagement involvement strategy. And as people might kind of realise, this has gone through some iterations. It's gone through the patient group consultative forum a couple of times, and it still needs to go back to them as well as to the board later on. But I was really pleased that we had, we used most of the meeting really to discuss the strategy, and committee members, I think, made some really important contributions, really adding scrutiny to the strategy and suggesting, you know, kind of more definite outcomes that are involved in the strategy. How are they going to be measured? And so really looking at the practicalities, I think, of this strategy, as well as the bigger picture of culture shift within the agency. And that's such a key area for us, really. We know that there are some really good pockets of patient engagement and involvement, but we want that consistency throughout the whole organisation, especially as the organisation is changing as well and transforming. So I think it was, even though it was a relatively short meeting, we were able to have some good debate on that particular topic. Looking at the future work of the organisation, we're developing this work schedule. ILAP was actually mentioned as because of this new innovation, that it would be really good to track through how patient safety and engagement is involved through that whole process. So it's a good idea to review it again. And we're also kind of we had some really good discussions on how we prioritise our work programme. And I think looking obviously at the Cambridge review, patient harms, and issues that are coming out of things like the yellow card scheme and other vigilance areas were highlighted within it. We're still developing that work programme, but I would also say we've also scheduled about 5 meetings this year. So we certainly have more time to go into more areas of scrutiny and assurance for the board. And maybe my fellow committee members wanted to add to how the first meeting went, but I felt people were very engaged in it, and it really made a difference having lay members on the committee.
Good, okay. Bruce, is there anything else you want to add in terms
No,
of...
I think Mercy summarised that very well, thank you.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. And Dave is nodding too. So could I just ask one question, which you might not know the answer to, Mercy, but you've talked about the patient engagement strategy for the agency. When do you think it would be ready to come to the board? Was that discussed at all?
Yes, it was discussed that it's probably ready by March.
Okay. Oh, next month. Excellent. So just want to make sure we capture that, Natalie, on the work schedule for the board. Then that's fantastic. Okay, colleagues, were there any specific questions for Mercy and the assurance report? No. Okay, I think then, well, thank you, Mercy. I think you've already got an additional action anyway from the last item. So, but I think this is really important, you know, and just for members of the public, this is a new board assurance committee that we've put in quite specifically. It's non-executive chaired, so hence Mercy's chairing it with 2 non-executive directors, and we've got 3 executive directors and 2 lay members. So we're genuinely trying to ensure that we review our processes to ensure that patient engagement and involvement, which are 2 different things, are appropriately covered through our various regulatory processes and activities. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and we look forward to the next item. The other area that's another new board assurance committee is in the area of dynamic organisation. And we've quite specifically set up a board assurance committee around organisational development and remuneration. So again, it's had the first meeting has occurred in the last sort of few weeks. So Anthony, as the chair of that committee, do you want to just give us an update on the key discussion points, please?
Yes, thank you. I'll assume people have read the paper. It's actually our committee's second meeting, which is probably why we're a little bit further ahead, because we had a meeting in December where we did all the planning. And given the nature of change in the organisation at the moment, we're meeting not on a quarterly basis as originally envisaged, but more on a monthly, 6-weekly basis, as it seems appropriate given the need for action in certain areas. So the paper looks at 4 key areas. The first one, the people survey, and people will be aware that the civil service conduct this on behalf of all organisations. The agency had a very high level of participation, about 78% versus 66% in the civil service. And we were assured that there was a good level of commitment, engagement, focus from the agency staff. And particularly as so many people are working from home now, that the majority of the workforce actually felt it wasn't challenging their productivity or had actually improved their productivity, so over 75%. But we were supporting of the executives' concerns around the negative impact of COVID on the mental health of members. About 50% said it had had an impact or a significant impact on their mental health. And I know that the executive have plans in hand to manage this. But what was assuring to us that 90% of the staff actually felt they could talk to their managers about this and they could have this responded to and dealt with. And also that they could talk to their teams. There was, again, over 90% felt it hadn't damaged their team working ability and their ability to connect with people. So overall, there's a process in place where the staff can review the people survey in each of the individual areas within the organisation. We'll look at priorities for focus in their own organisation, but we have asked the agency to make sure that they take a particular cross-agency focus on leadership, particularly given this period of change, and also responding to the issues of well-being. I'll go through the whole paper, Stephen, and then go for questions. So the second, one point I think people will be quite pleased to note is that over 90% of staff were proud to recommend to work for the MHRA and would be keen to recommend it to people as a place of employment, which I think, particularly given the challenging year they've had and the workload, is a great reflection of the people that work within the organisation. Regarding talent, we reviewed the existing talent process. Amanda, myself and other members of the committee have obviously worked in different organisations and have been involved in these processes. The agency is following a standard cross-business, cross-industry approach. And our main concern was that given the periods of change coming forward, that we review the talent process earlier in the year than that might have normally happened. And also perhaps that they start to look externally for talent and successors, because it has been quite an internally focused process. If I move on to organisational development on page 3, We, as you can see, looked at the plan timeline, the principles for change, some high-level risks, and also the plans for communicating the model. We were quite keen that during communication internally, whilst the change any change can obviously have impact on our patients who we serve and stakeholders, initial change of organisations always impact on the individuals, and that question of what does this mean for me? And June and the team have very clearly helped think through for the organisation how people can focus on understanding the implications of change for themselves. In saying that, we were slightly concerned about the design phase for implementing the change, given that there's been significant discussion on this since November. We know the model we're moving towards, it's been the subject of board discussion. We actually felt that perhaps there should be a compression of that design phase, and actually it could be that 80% of the structure, if not the individuals, would be in place by the month after next. We asked for a specific focus on talent. We've all led change in major organisations, so we know the issues of people jumping ship. We have some extraordinary talent and expertise, and we're conscious we want to retain that. So we've asked that the leadership very quickly make sure they know who their talent is, and that they're focused on explaining and communicating what type of capabilities and expertise the new organisation, inverted commas, is looking for. Similarly, we've all faced the challenges of blockers, and I gave an example there, and we would like people to make sure there's a focus on that by the middle of next month. You know, we can't have historical behaviours hampering what is a significantly required change for the organisation. And we have our next meeting in March, and I'm looking forward to the feedback from June, more detailed feedback than the brief feedback we got on the rollout to staff and how things are progressing. And then the finest one is the people strategy. It was a conscious decision to allow the people strategies to expire last year because the organisation was going through so much change. But given where we're heading to, we do feel it's critical that we do have a revised people strategy, and we've agreed a timeline for that. It's my typo, I'm afraid, Stephen, where it says March. It's coming back to us in May. So I didn't just give them 4 weeks to go away and develop a people strategy.
That doesn't sound like
that
you
would have
at all.
been really unfair. And then the final point is areas of focus. They're listed there. What's missing from that is diversity, which the board asked us to look at last month. And again, that's my fault for missing it off the list. So I'll leave the report there.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Anthony. Obviously, this is, again, still a new board assurance committee, but I think it shows that, you know, we're very concerned about, you know, staff well-being in particular, yeah, identifying top talent and developing people through the organisation. That's really crucial. And obviously managing the changes as best that we possibly can. June, I know you're a member of that committee and we're involved in the discussions. Is there anything else you want to add from the executive perspective?
No, but I'd like to say how helpful it was. And it's, I guess, one of our characteristics that we always think carefully. We wish to return to issues and make sure they're the very best solutions. But we now know that time is of the essence, and I really appreciated the discussion there about starting to look towards more acceleration. We've had a great period of discussion since November, but now it's time to get some pretty nice timetables put together on dates for the detailed design, etc. So that really was my take-home message: get moving.
Yeah, yeah. And as mentioned previously, you know, obviously last week you were briefing staff on the proposed organisational changes. So that's very much you know, work in progress now. So we can actually really start to accelerate forward, I hope, so, which is good. Yeah. Okay, colleagues, are there any specific questions around Anthony's assurance report? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Anthony. I think we can note that. I suppose the only question that I had just on the areas of focus, obviously there's a number of things there. Yeah, where do you intend to start? What's the priority from that particular list?
Well, I think that the organisational change, you can see that's why we'll be meeting every month to 6 weeks, because that's a clear focus. Yeah. And diversity, we're hoping to bring to the, I think it's the end of March meeting to have a look at that. Some of the others are more, I think, principles. So in every conversation, we're focused on the culture, making sure we're delivering one agency. But at times through the year, they may come up as a specific topic if we think there's an area we need to investigate further.
Yeah, well, as you and I both know, culture change is incredibly difficult to achieve, but is a fundamental part of what we're trying to address here through the change programme. So that's also quite clear. Okay, right. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's very helpful. If we move on to our sort of fourth strategic objective, it's one of financial sustainability. And I think on that basis, I think we've got two papers actually. The first is primarily looking at financial performance. The second is then looking more at some of the risks. But John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer, can you just talk to us briefly around what the current financial performance of the agency is and how that compares with our current business plan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, happy to. I think for the benefit of public board attendees, it's probably just worth, by way of introduction, saying that MHRA is both an agency of DHSC, but it's also a trading fund. So we charge fees for the work we do, which makes up the majority of our income. So we're similar to other agencies like the Ordnance Survey, Land Registry, the DVSA. There's around a dozen or so across government of a similar characteristic. We do receive some government funding. It's primarily for NIBS, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, based up in South Mims with an extensive laboratory and scientific presence. So the numbers in the paper are the 9 months to December 2020 compared with the previous years. Those 9 months accounts are currently being audited by KPMG and the National Audit Office as part of their interim audit, and there have no issues been found so far. In those numbers, we're seeing some impact of COVID, loss of seminar income for us, which is a reasonably profitable activity for us. The suspension of clinical trials has clearly hit CPRD's intentions to develop their activities in that area, and Sam's team, the inspectors, have had to do their work differently. Overtime is up, but probably not as much in terms of the actual work that people have been doing, particularly on the kind of vaccine side. However, we have also benefited from the fact that travel costs are down. So broadly in COVID terms, roughly level. I think a couple of points to flag. Significantly, we've been receiving some transition funding from Department of Health and Social Care to soften the implications of losing our European income. And that covers the 21 months to December 2020 up to the end of transition period. So we received 17 million in 2019-20, and then a further 12 million for the 9 months just gone to December. So 29 million in all. And as I say, that's primarily masks the impact of the fall in European income. Also, if you look below the operating surplus line, you can see another one-off item, which is Treasury pension funding. So a year or so ago, the Treasury significantly increased the cost of employer contributions. For a couple of years, they've been covering the impact of that, but actually from next year, we'll need to cover that cost of 2.2 million ourselves. So worth bearing in mind, we've got a couple of significant transition funding areas which are basically coming to an end. We plan to make a deficit for this year, and we're intending to use our cash reserves to cover that. There's a significant amount of change costs, IT investment factored in. So you'll see in the forecast number around 19 million forecast to be spent in this financial year to the end of March. So in terms of summary, we've got a slight deficit at the moment. We do have significant cash reserves. However, we know we need to make significant investments to replace legacy IT systems, and that transitional funding that I've highlighted is coming to an end. So we'll need to look at our cost base to meet demand in a post-transition world. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. I think that's a helpful overview. Just before we go to questions, can I just maybe bring John Quinn into the conversation? Because obviously, you know, some of the change costs, and yes, significant investment in IT. You know, just looking at the numbers right now, John, I can see that we've spent £10 million on change costs so far. We're going to spend 19 by the end of the year in 3 months, which is actually now only 6 weeks. So I'm just wondering, in terms of how confident you are that we can spend all of the money that we are planning to do on the IT investments.
Stephen, so there is a lag, and of course it's not just the technology, it's the change costs associated with that. So it's a slight lag in reporting. It is safe to say I was reflecting on how many of our peer organisations have invested more heavily in technology to enable this strange year of remote working. We've done that within our own budgets. Based on the investments that we've made before. So I think certainly operationally, I think we're on track for budget. I think there have been some delays caused by our absence from the office this year. And of course, we're replanning quite significantly with the constraints that we've now set ourselves, not unhelpfully actually, in terms of trying to focus on a 2-year plan for the benefit of the board and the public. I think the work that we're doing now is to see what we can do within a 2-year time frame, within a 40 million envelope, and inevitably that will mean where we can extend things for longer we should, because obviously we want to minimise the impact and free up as much investment as we can for the strategically important activities. So where we are right now, Stephen, is we are taking the outputs from size and shape work of the organisation and the change strategy. We are doing quite rapidly some design work to see what options we have, and we'll be testing some of that thinking with the executive committee in the next few weeks, and plan to come back to the board in April with our plan as it currently stands then.
Okay, thank you, John. John Fundry, do you want to come back in?
Just probably something I should have mentioned at the time, Chair. So in terms of that change expenditure, we undertake a review once it's complete, determine whether it's capital or revenue. And we estimate that around 10 to 20% of that will be capital. Now in cash terms, it makes no difference. It still comes out of our cash reserves, but an element of it may be reversed out of these numbers once we do that work. These days, the level of capital is significantly reduced as we move to more cloud-based systems, so we're capitalising less.
Yeah. Does that mean, John, then there's an opportunity potentially to reduce the operating loss by the end of the year, if with a combination of stringent management of costs and also then potentially capitalisation? Because at the moment you've got a forecast of 2.2 million, and that strikes me as getting quite close to being able to break even, which would be a much more attractive proposition.
Yes, it does. So certainly as we capitalise elements, it would reduce our current forecast deficit. Though I must stress, capital and revenue both come out of the same bank account. So our underlying financial position, there's not much difference.
Yeah, that's the operating surplus where we're looking to lose £7.5 million. That's just not sustainable in the long term. We can manage the 1-year hit, but we can't do that on an ongoing basis, I think it's fair to say. Okay, were there any other questions from this rather salutary set of numbers? Okay, well, thank you, John. I think keep working it, keep looking for the opportunities for improvement, as I know you and your finance team already are. But this is an agency-wide issue. This is not a finance issue. It's an agency-wide issue, and hence, a key driver of our change program. So, thank you for the update and the transparency as far as that's concerned. Michael, I didn't bring you into the conversation because I knew you were next up to talk about the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. But obviously, I know financial performance is one of the things that you discussed there.
Yeah.
But, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And yes, where can I start? I'd like to focus on two fundamental points, and it really builds on John's excellent financial report. The board asked Direct to review the financial scenarios and risks around the future operating model and to give some assurance around that. I think we do need to start from the position that you and John have emphasised, that at the moment we are not financially resilient or will be financially sustainable in the longer term unless the change programme is effectively implemented. So I'm very encouraged by June's words, because financial resilience is closely linked to the time path, how quickly we respond and implement the change programme, but implement the change programme in a way that maintains safety and patient safety. So June's point about pace, and also the point made by Anthony about moving forward on the operating model, is key. Our conclusion was that when we looked at the risk register, we felt that the majority of risks related to the change programme are on the risk register, and there are actions in support of them. But having said that, we felt that the risk register could be enhanced by making a clear distinction between implementation risks and benefit realisation risks. And benefit realisation is really, really important, because that's what at the end the agency is about. And as we go forward, there's inevitability, there's some optimism bias. All organisations have that in change programmes. Things will come out of the blue. New opportunities will arise, but in all cases, we need to be confident that where change is forced upon us or things don't happen as intended, we can appraise the benefits, and our response is very much geared to ensuring that those benefits are maintained. So we felt that distinction in the risk register could be made between implementation and benefit risk and how we're managing them. If I go on to the more mainstream things that ARAT looked at, for members of the public, we have a stream of internal audit reports that are independently produced for us and give us assurance that the organisation is managing and controlling its resources effectively. At this committee, we had two reports, one on patient engagement, and a second report on medical devices. The report on patient engagement was awarded moderate assurance, which is showing that most things are on track. And I was pleased that Mercy joined our discussion, and I know her committee has been looking at patient engagement in much more detail. The second report on medical devices, which really focused on the action that the agency is taking in response to the medical devices safety review by Baroness Cumberledge, was a limited assurance. For members of the public listening, I want to make a clear distinction here. Internal audit were not saying that the agency were not acting appropriately in response to Baroness Cumberledge. We've had several board discussions, and we have assurance that the agency is taking the recommendations very seriously, and there is a whole range of actions that are in place. The issue that internal audit raised was more around coordination, senior officer responsibility, and the importance again of being clear that we have a benefit realisation framework in place that enables us to demonstrate to our stakeholders and to the general public that implementation of Cumberledge's recommendations are having a real impact in improving patient engagement and ultimately patient safety. And I'm sure the agency will take that seriously and will continue to do so. I know it's something that the Chief Executive has very much to mind. So I think this is an issue that can be resolved very quickly. And I think it's good that we had this internal audit report now that enables us to take the necessary action to be able to demonstrate the benefits that we secure. I think those were the main points that I would bring to the board's attention. There's other issues that we covered, but most of that was business as usual. Pleased to say that the external audit is on target. We're going to meet again at the end of March, beginning of April, when we will have the remainder of internal audits reports. I'm fairly confident that will give us the assurance that we need that governance is operating effectively within the organisation. Stephen, I'm very happy to take comments, but my colleagues Barbara and Mandy, who are members of the committee who make an important contribution, may have other comments they may wish to make.
Mandy, is there anything else you want to add to Michael's report?
No, I think it's a good summary. I think what we're also trying to do with things like internal audit is to ensure it helps drive some of the change agenda, that we're incorporating that so it's not seen as something separate. Yeah. So I think that's good to integrate that and make sure we've got our governance structures embedded in the new organisation.
Yeah, I think this demonstrates how a number of all these different activities are all intersecting, you know, and I think we're seeing it from different lenses, if you like. That's the way I like to think about it. Just thinking specifically on medical devices, I'm just wondering, June, whether I could just bring you in just to you know, specifically just talk about you know, the actions that we're taking in response to this limited assurance report.
Well, thank you, and a special thank you to Michael and the ARAC. We are making sure as a first step that there is very clear allocated responsibility ownership for each recommendation, and that is happening and should be in place imminently. Clearly, one of the gaps in our governance is the Chief Safety Officer appointment, and that is now becoming acute. But the good news is that our appointments procedure has now reached a very key point with shortlisting yesterday, and the ability, if successful, a candidate is identified, to make an appointment in the first 2 weeks of March. So I think when that gap is filled, we'll have the accountability, which has up to now been held by me with the two directors for medicines, vigilance and devices reporting to me, that will be secure. And a priority for this new appointee will be absolutely reading this audit report, which is helpful, and ensuring that the accountabilities are clearly in place. But the board will know from the discussion we had last month that we're very clear now on the deliverables in response to Cumberledge and the short, medium and long-term timeframes to achieve those. But this report has really brought into focus the vital importance of clear accountabilities. The other aspect, which I mentioned earlier, Chair, is the fact that we now have an Act of Parliament, and we will be absolutely focusing on how that Act is used with subsequent legislation, the statutory instruments, to make sure that we have absolutely the powers that are needed. And in particular, I highlight the new expert committee that will have a statutory footing, which will provide a real focus for prompt, effective, risk-based decisions. And that one of the key themes of Cumberledge, which is the time it took, will now be addressed by very clear processes and timeframes. So I hope that helps. And I do see this report, this audit report, as a very timely baseline for us. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate you know, the seriousness with which you're taking this. When would be a good time to just ensure that the actions that you're talking about have been taken? I'm just wondering whether we should actually ask ARAC just to just review that the actions have been put in place at an appropriate point. I just don't know what that point should be.
I'd be grateful if ARAC would look at the next meeting. I think if that's, is it 2 months away? Whichever the next meeting is, we don't want to let this lie. We have to have that assurance for the next ARAC.
I think, Stephen, it's important as well to support what June said, that before we get to the end of the financial year and we sign off the governance statement and the report, we have a meeting. I think it's been potentially scheduled for something around about the 8th of April. So if we could factor that into the agenda, that would be very good.
Yeah, I think, Natalie, if we can just make an action there for ARAC just to ensure that the medical device internal audit actions have been taken, that would be very helpful. Mercy, obviously this is another area that intersects with
yes,
your responsibilities too as our Patient Safety and Engagement Committee.
And that's why I wanted to comment, really. And it was really useful to be invited to the ARAC meeting, especially because of the internal audit reports. And certainly on the patient engagement, I think one of the recommendations was perhaps to have an SRO across the organisation to be kind of really hold responsibility and hold kind of the ring for that. And I just wanted to say how it was kind of really useful to be there and to be involved in those discussions, and to thank Michael and the committee for that, and perhaps maybe to encourage that a bit more, that we do actually link into each other's committee. I know the idea is that the committee chairs are going to have regular kind of meetings together as well. So I think that can assure people a bit more about that kind of overlap too. So yes, so that was really important. And also just to flag up that after that meeting, I had a discussion with the head of internal audit too about our future work programme, and that was useful as well. So I'm sure some of that will come back to Barack.
Yeah, okay. Again, I completely encourage the working across our board assurance committees. You know, this is a complex organisation. We want multiple sources of assurance to ensure that we're doing the very best possible job that we can. So thank you for that. I think that's very, very helpful, Mercy. Michael, there was just one other question I had before I open it up further. Is you talked about a benefit realisation framework, you know, being very, very important. I just wonder if you could just explain a little more about what you think that would actually look like in practical terms, just to put a little bit more colour on your proposal.
What I think it's very clear that what the agency has done, and we as a board have done, have been very clear about what we think the change programme is there to deliver. You know, it's around innovation, improvements in patient safety, a whole range of different things. But there, beneath that, there are a number of other benefit factors that are key, and different divisions within the organisation have responsibility for. I think it can incentivise people if those are very clear. And so what you're not just focusing on is what is the risk of failure. What we're also interested in is what is the risk of not being successful. And I think it plays into some of the points that Anthony has been talking about. It helps support the cultural change, because I think the whole organisation, we are all impressed by the vision that we have for the future. It's the way in which we communicate that within the organisation, and the way in which we manage the realisation of it, that it becomes something that's quite positive. That's what I would think would be quite important. It does relate also to my point earlier, is things will not happen as you intended. So just sit back and say, does that mean that the benefit might be a bit later down track? If that's the case, that's not necessarily a problem. It might be a sensible approach, but it creates a different type of dialogue in the organisation if it's just focused on the negativity of risk.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful actually. And John Fundry, if I could just maybe bring you into the conversation, because obviously in your portfolio, you've not only got finance, but you've also got HR as well. I'm just wondering if you, since the ARAC meeting, you've given any more thought to how we could actually start to describe the benefits and track, more importantly, the benefits, so we can demonstrate the changes that we're making and working.
So to be honest, Chair, I mean, we've been looking at this for quite a while anyway, through the EPMO. Yeah. I think we need to make that even more of a focus, as Michael is highlighting. So June chairs our Strategic Change Committee. It's clear that that committee needs visibility of what we are proposing to deliver, and a tracking mechanism to do so. So we'll ensure that that's there.
Yeah, okay, and I think building that into our business plan for next year, we've talked about balanced scorecards previously, so I think we need to try and make sure we've got a consistent set of measures rather than lots of independent ones, because they need to be integrated from my point of view. Okay, sorry to hog the discussion. Was there any questions that anybody else wanted to specifically raise around this whole area of financial sustainability, both you know, John's report and also Michael's assurance report? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's note the report. But again, I think just the action there for ARAC, Natalie, I think just specifically just to review that particular internal audit review actions to ensure that they're completed. And then you could report back, Michael, at the next time you do an assurance report. Okay, so that I think brings us to the end of the business of the agenda, but we've obviously now got the opportunity to have a discussion around questions from the public. So Rachel, do you want to start us off by picking the first question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I thought I would start off with a finance question as it links to the last items on the agenda. And the question is whether the costs for extending access to patient and public involvement have been taken into consideration in the papers that were presented, and mentioning that the European Medicines Agency has an extensive network allocated for this purpose of patient and public involvement.
John?
So specifically, that increased involvement would form part of the overall change programme. So we're in the process of developing that costing. So no, it's not currently reflected in there at the moment over and above the resources that are currently already in Rachel's team as part of that.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add to that, June, about how you see the priority of that in the future from a costing point?
We've been able to, gain a huge amount from the efforts made in Europe, and we'll look at that as an exemplar when we look at our own ambition in the context of the patient and public involvement strategy. As John says, we'll factor that into the change programme, but from the European experience, we know that there has to be a body of expertise, activity, fora, if we're truly to involve patients and the public in all our activities. So it's going to be a key element of our change programme.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I see that we've been joined by Sophie Wintrich, who's the CEO of MDS UK. Thank you for submitting some questions before the meeting, which enabled us to gain your permission to for you to appear on this particular video. So welcome, Sophie. Thank you for joining us. Would you just like to say first a little bit about your organisation, just explain for other members of the public exactly what MDS UK is, and then maybe ask your question?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. So Myelodysplastic UK is a patient support group representing myelodysplastic syndromes, a rarer blood cancer. So we're a small organisation in the UK, and we're also connected to the MDS Alliance, our umbrella organisation for this disease. So we have a finger in a few pies.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining us. I know you had a number of questions, but could we just maybe take your first two, and then we'll see where we get to.
Thank you. Yes. So my first question is regarding PPI involvement, and this also connects to the questions that Bruce Campbell had earlier on lay member involvement. So I would like to know what the steps are. What are the steps the MHRA are putting in place to ensure patient experts or patient advocates have full access to all the licensing processes, including ensuring relevant disease experience, confidentiality measures to enable full sharing of data and attendance at all meetings, and the ability to contribute external data when relevant. And do you want my second question straight away?
Let's answer that one, then we'll come back to your second one, if that's okay. So, June, do you want to kick this one off?
Well, thank you, and greatly welcome your very clear question and the way you've articulated the opportunities. And there are many, and they're truly important to bring in the patient expertise, disease experience being key to the judgment on risks that we have to make on behalf of, but your perspective absolutely vital. And we know from good research that sometimes our appreciation of risk is not the same as the patient whose experience in real life is something they take risk judgments all the time. So I will point to our evolving and to be discussed patient and public involvement strategy that will have multiple components in it that pick up the elements of your question, including the ability to contribute data. Now, we do have a track record of engaging in that way. The current exercise we're doing on the acne drug isotretinoin is where we're seeking information, evidence, contributions of data from patients and the public. So that's something that we do, but we're going to be improving that, how well it's done and how comprehensively it's done. We've just extended our programme of gaining that information on isotretinoin. So I think, Chair, if you agree, I'd like to ask Rachel to give a few more parameters around when we'll start to factor in everything which we've just had in that question. So,
yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Rachel, this is very much in your areas. Can you provide some more background, please?
Yeah, thank you. So as we are certainly actively looking at this as part of the development of the patient and public engagement strategy, which Mercy referred to in her update from the committee. So we are looking to have a discussion at the board in March and then carry out a short consultation on the strategy itself, so that we would very much welcome any views that come through on that before we finalise the publication of the strategy during the summer. On the broader question of looking at processes and how patient involvement is embedded, we've started work on that now. We've talked about the change strategy, and that is a key part of work within that change strategy for the agency.
Yeah, you see, Sophie, I think you've raised a really important point here, and I'm really glad that you have. And what I'd like to do is probably invite you to come back at our next board meeting when we're actually talking about this particular strategy, because I'd be really interested to hear whether you think actually the strategy meets the needs you've identified. And if you don't, and you're prepared to ask another question, I'd be very happy to receive that, because we need people like yourself to hold our feet to the fire, to ensure that we genuinely are meeting the needs that have been identified, not just through Cambridge, but also how we want to deal with and involve patients at every step of our processes. So if you're willing to continue this discussion, I think we'll be very willing to continue to invite you to be involved, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you. The second question I had is actually related, but it's more specific. So I wanted to know whether the MHRA will be implementing any of the EMA best practice processes of working with patient experts and advocates, and which one of these processes will the MHRA adopt, which ones they want, and if they don't, why not?
Okay. June, can I ask you to start this one off, please? And then please pass.
I hope, thank you, Chair. I gave a positive, if you like, reflection on the first question, in that the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, has made real strides in this area, particularly through their forum, which is all composed of patients, and if you like, that ability for patients to truly shape strategically the initiatives that we're talking about. So we've learned a great deal. I think it would be premature to say which aspects of best practice we will adopt, but I think some of them will be self-evident. One of them is inclusiveness, openness, and receptivity to the ideas for strategically meaningful involvement that we can actually commit to, with objectives that are published and work programs that deliver. So this isn't a tokenistic strategy. This is meaningful, and the reason it's important is that it improves outcomes for regulators, outcomes for patients. So it's all on the table at the moment, and as Chairman has said, come back and see if we have selected aspects that match up with what you would aspire us to be doing. We're really grateful to you.
Yeah. I think it's also important, Sophie, just to mention that I think the best practice doesn't just come from EMA. And I think an organisation like NICE, for example, has got a huge amount of experience and expertise in this area. And both Mercy and Bruce have both been involved with NICE in those sort of processes. So I think there's best practice in other organisations which we need to learn from as well. So Europe is definitely part of it, but I think an organisation like NICE, with things we can learn there, and then we need to make sure that this is how it's going to work within our own organisation too. So I think this is going to be a continuing dialogue, but I think hopefully this sets us on the right path, and so hopefully that answers your question as far as we can today.
Thank you so much. I might just add, as I have participated in both EMA processes and NICE and SMC, so I am able to compare all three.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you for your question, Sophie. Really appreciate your involvement today. You have a good day. Okay, Rachel, next round of questions, please.
Okay, so we've got a number of questions about the yellow card scheme, I think, again, following on from the discussion earlier. So perhaps if we take those in a group. The first one related to how the yellow card scheme avoids double counting. So when a patient and a doctor both submit reports about the same side effect. and how a patient can be sure that their doctor has actually reported a side effect. So perhaps that would start us off on yellow card, and then there's a couple of follow-ups.
Okay, June, sorry it keeps coming back to you, but do you mind starting?
No, that's fine. Our database system will match whether there are more reports than one of a key reaction. So it will detect if a patient and a health professional have both reported. But it's something we constantly keep under review. And not long ago, we looked at the various approaches to this that other regulators use. And we gave a lot of attention to improving what we call the algorithm for duplicate detection. So I hope that reassures you that it's something that we take very seriously. We don't want double counting. That would obviously not be helpful. But in bringing together a patient's report and a health professional's report, we get the best of both worlds. So it's not something to ever worry you. If you think your health professional's reported and a member of the public, the patient, wants to report as well, don't worry. We have a very robust system to detect a duplicate and manage to merge the data. So that's the number one. And how does
June, if I could just add there, I think actually my simple message would be, if in doubt, report. you know,
don't delay. Report today.
Don't second guess. We'd rather have the extra report than not receive them at all. So please don't self-select.
Yes. How can you be sure your doctor has reported? That's not quite so straightforward. And of course, we would encourage a dialogue for a doctor to be discussing with their patient if they suspect that there might have been an adverse reaction. And if a patient reports, we do ask on the form if we can contact your doctor. And in fact, about half of patients actually say, yes, go ahead, or members of the public. But I think it's not so easy to know. If you write to us, we'll be able to do the various behind the scenes inquiries to make sure the permissions are there. So it's not something you would find out by looking at our electronic drug analysis print. You might think that might be me, but without making the inquiries, you wouldn't be certain. So if there's a situation you're wondering about, do write into us.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Okay. And continuing the yellow card theme, there's also a question about concerns that important reports from older people might be missed because they're not either comfortable or able to submit yellow card reports via the website. So perhaps, June, you would want to comment on that.
Thank you. This is really important, and how we make it easy for anyone to use the scheme is vital to us, and we constantly look into, could we be doing more? Obviously, the website is a good way to do it, but we will always take a paper report. And in fact, if you talk to a health professional, talk in a pharmacy, you will find someone who can report for you. So someone can report on your behalf, and that's perfectly fine. We've got various other ideas in the offing. Our yellow card app can be downloaded, and a colleague or a member of the family could do that for you. And some of the ideas we have is to link that in with the NHS app. In other words, to make it easier to get all the details together when reporting. But how elderly people are able to use the scheme just the same as anyone else is a matter of equity of access. So again, even if you need to phone in, we will always take a report that way.
Okay. Could I just pause there, Rachel, a moment, and maybe bring Mercy into the conversation? I'm just wondering, we've talked about yellow card scheme before, and I think we all accept it needs to evolve. I'm just wondering, did that feature in your work schedule?
It did. Actually, it's quite an important area. We wanted reassurance about how the yellow card scheme was working. And I think the COVID vaccine reporting as well has actually added to that, because we've obviously been a bit more proactive on vigilance too. So I think that is something that we want to schedule to come back to the committee so we can have a deeper dive into what's working, what isn't, and what changes are going to be happening to that, because it's a really, really important area.
Yeah. Have you got any idea when that's going to feature in the schedule? Is that in a couple of months or?
A couple of months, I would think. Obviously, you need to talk to June about how we kind of schedule some of the work programme so that it coincides, I think, with the most effective way that we can use the committee to influence some of these things.
Yeah, because again, I think these questions are very helpful, just again highlighting some very real issues of equity of access in particular, and effectiveness of the process. So I think if we could have an in-depth review through the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee and then a report back to the board that way, I think that would be very helpful, Mercy. So
I guess, Chair and Mercy, it may be more than one look, but if what we're hearing today is that equity of access, ease of access is critically important, I'll take back to the team to see if we could actually produce something, a little, aid memoir or whatever, because there's always a way, and not to delay people.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I think that is important for a number of different areas, that they kind of come round to us on a kind of a regular basis, really.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you for that. Rachel, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. Final question on yellow card is how the scheme validates reports of side effects that might have been made maliciously. And the questioner has cited anti-vax groups as a potential example of that. So how do we deal with malicious reporting or possible malicious reporting?
June?
Yes, an important aspect, and it does rely on the careful scrutiny by the teams of scientists, clinicians, scientists, and obviously any report is treated as a report that feeds into signal detection, but at that point, is it a valid signal is a key step of the pathway, and experts will look very carefully, give the benefit of the doubt, but if there's a suspicion that this isn't a true bill suspected adverse reaction, that's actually one of the issues that will be discussed. So I can't give you any figures at the moment, but we do look out for what might not be a truly attributable adverse reaction, and would err on the side of treating everything as if it could be, until we know that there may be an element of doubt there.
Yeah, but it's also important that that's why we want as many signals as we can possibly get, because it also helps to keep it into context. Because if you suddenly get one outlier, it becomes a less credible signal perhaps than if you've got sort of multiple contacts, as it were. But, okay, now thank you, June. Rachel, next topics.
So shall we move on to several questions about COVID vaccines? So the first one is relating to patients who are at risk or older age groups who've had their first dose of the Pfizer jab, but who are now concerned about supply for the second jab in mid-March. So what or who can reassure them? I think that's a question about availability of supply of second doses.
Okay, June, do you want to start us off?
I can kick off, Chair, and I expect Christian might want to come in there as well. As part of our one agency process, we do approve all the batches through the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control. And I think we can say at this stage that the batches are coming through, and that clearly there isn't a blockage there at all. The prioritisation of use of the vaccines for the second dose, catching up with that second dose, is really a matter for our colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care, advised by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. So while we have a view from our expert committee that the 12-week gap is supported by various kinds of science, including the fact that spacing the vaccines can, in most instances, give a better response. How they're deployed for the second dose is really a matter outside our jurisdiction, our remit. Chair, Christian might like to comment here as well.
Yeah, Christian, I'll bring you in, particularly around all the work that your team have been doing around batch release to ensure that supply, we are not the blockage in the system, as it were.
Indeed, thanks. So indeed, I can confirm that, and this is important for public confidence, that the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control will batch release. That means independently test each and every batch for a vaccine. A batch contains several thousands, many thousands of doses. So we have established a system already from early on, as Dr. Rain said, that will ensure timely release of these, so that there is no delay by that, but that we add to the confidence of the public by assuring the independently ensuring the quality of the batches. So we have established that, and it's all there.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And there's also another question about second doses. So the question is asking, what work's going on to follow up and validate the decision to delay the second vaccine dose beyond that examined in clinical trials or the emergency approval? And is there any real life investigation of its effect being undertaken?
Okay, June?
Absolutely there is. And we work closely with the public health teams who've got surveillance in place, looking at effectiveness after the first dose and again right through to the period of time when some of the, I think it's about 500,000 so far, have had second dose. It's mature data, and I understand that it will be put into the public domain in the coming period of time. Can't give a precise date. Our expert working group keeps on top of all the strands of evidence coming through. And again, Chair, Christian was there yesterday, and I'm afraid I couldn't be. But Christian, would you like to, if you like, validate what I've just said? The data are coming through and they're encouraging.
Yeah. Christian?
Yes, yes, indeed. The data are indeed coming in. They are presented, and we are looking at these as well. As Dr. Rain said, these are post-licensing data on effectiveness. So we would take regulatory action as well if we needed on them, but for now there is no reason. So we are well reassured about the data that are coming up, and they're in line with what we also observe in literature from other regions in the world.
Yeah, I think this sort of brings the benefit of our independent expert groups. Yeah, they're a very important part of the way that we regulate medicines, not just in terms of the initial licensing decision, but also the post-marketing surveillance, as it were. And actually, I think that's why we'll continue to keep a very close eye and monitor this situation very carefully. Okay, Rachel.
And then there's a final question on vaccines, which is, what is the MHRA doing to monitor the efficacy of the vaccines in subgroups of patients that are less likely to fully respond? And there's an example of patients with blood cancer that's given.
Okay. June?
Well, thank you, Chair. Clearly, we look for robust forms of data for vulnerable populations, including those with immunosuppression. And there are some follow-up commitments from companies to get data so that it is there in a robust form, unlike the surveillance that we've just talked about, which is a broader strategy. So we would look for well-conducted subpopulation studies. And we've already mentioned earlier on that there is going to be a study in children and that there's a gap around pregnant women, and we want to fill that gap. To the best of my knowledge, there are ongoing pieces of work under what we call our risk management plan to fill in the data that are needed in patients who've got immunosuppression, such as those with blood cancers. I don't know if either Sam or Christian would like to add to that. I'm sorry I can't give you a time frame, but I do know it's an important commitment because the safe use in vulnerable populations is really important to us.
Okay, Christian, can you help us again?
Thanks, indeed. So the public is also kindly referred to the public assessment reports that we have published on gov.uk. You can find them via Google, and there you can see a detailed table in that towards the end of the report on what post-authorization commitments, as we call them, are part of this. And for example, for one of the vaccines, we have indeed a cohort going on vaccine effectiveness in a protective immune response in immunocompromised adults. So these are those groups which have intentionally been excluded at the time of the clinical trials. this is not uncommon. It's actually usual practice that certain groups are not included in a clinical trial, so that you have a clean readout of the clinical trial. The same is true for pregnant women, for example, and other cohorts. So there is systematic follow-up after approval, and that's been thought of and that's been taken care of.
Okay, that's great. Sam, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think what both Dr. Wayne and Christian said has really summed it up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I think the other point, Rachel, I'll just make is I think the way the question was worded, I'd just like to make clear the MHRA doesn't do the research. It's actually the originators, the companies that manufacture the products that do the research, and then we review the data. So that's the way that it actually works from a regulatory point of view. Okay, Rachel, was there any other question?
So there's a couple more, Stephen. So that was all of the vaccines questions. There's another question about the UK approval of a product called Enhertu for breast cancer, which has been announced in a press release from AstraZeneca. And the question is, how will the MHRA communicate new UK drug approvals going forward?
That's an interesting question there as well, particularly. So June, do you want to start, and then maybe Sam can maybe add a little further?
Yes, really good question. Clearly, all approvals are public, and since we moved over to gov.uk, I haven't personally looked, but approvals of new medicines are public, and Rachel might correct me on that one. Obviously, if something is an important approval, and particularly if we've been working with NICE, there's very often either a joint statement, or even, the MHRA may make it more widely known, and we would work with the company involved, because a breakthrough is such an important moment for the patients whose future treatment plans will depend on it. So this is not something that we want to keep to ourselves and just slip it out on gov.uk. So Chair, maybe Sam would like to comment, and particularly the innovation passport work that's coming along.
Yeah, that was precisely the point I was going to bring Sam in on, actually. So in terms of the way this can work in the future and actually communicating about decisions, how do you see that happening?
Absolutely. I mean, again, as I said earlier, it's something that's evolving, but I certainly think that the whole ILAP or the innovative licensing pathway can certainly improve what we do already, and I think we can get communication much earlier. I think at points where decisions are made, and because everything's condensed so much, there's real opportunity there to get information out. And again, as I said earlier, getting that patient involvement in terms of the content of what we put out, I think is also really key to this, and the channels that we use. And I'm sure Rachel will comment that we use quite a wide range of communication channels as well to get information to patients. So I think ILAP will come into its own in this particular respect, and we'll see that grow over the coming months. Thank you, Chair.
That's great. Thank you. Rachel?
And so there's just one last question that's come through, which is back to side effects. And the questioner is saying, is there not a danger that important side effects may not get reported if the GP makes their own judgment that the side effects are not linked?
Interesting question. June?
Well, that's really, really important. And one of the first principles is that to recognise that our yellow card doesn't pick up everything. And in particular, while it's very good for rare things and unusual things, something like perhaps more heart attacks in people who've got diabetes wouldn't be easily picked up. And that's why we have to use other approaches as well. So we understand that there are knowledge gaps in the yellow card system, that there's underreporting, that it's always reliant on someone having a suspicion, and you might not have a suspicion. And so therefore we must have strong methods to study through epidemiological tools and approaches, linkages with CPRD and into academia, how we can actually make sure that we've got our tentacles out there to pick up things that yellow card doesn't identify. The first step, as Chairman has said, is always to encourage, even if you've got some doubt about something. We've had tremendously good signals in the past where those that reported were really quite not, you know, not sure that it might be useful, but told us all the same. And that applies clearly to patients, relatives as well. The slightest suspicion, let us know, but we must always complement that with other strategies. And this is where this regulatory work stream introduced about 10 years ago, called a risk management plan, is you expect certain things, you go looking for them and conduct studies prospectively. Marrying all that together is as good as we can do at the moment, but who knows, in the world of big data, we may be able to do even better. I think our new Chief Safety Officer, when they arrive, is going to have quite a to-do list, and this is on it. So thank you for that question.
I think, can I just actually bring Professor Liam Smooth into the discussion, only because, you know, Liam, you have been working as a GP. So just from a practicing clinician's perspective, you know, reporting side effects, can you sort of maybe give your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, two perspectives really. Yeah, I mean, as a GP, it's clearly important, and it's something we take, you know, very seriously, particularly when we've got new drugs or new vaccines on the market. It's something I think we're very aware of. And it's always kind of done in a spirit of, you know, hope that they'll be, you know, appropriately taken into account and followed up. And I think that happens. And speaking as an academic, you know, particularly with, for example, the COVID-19 vaccines, I'm well aware that there's a whole bunch of different academic groupings working with Public Health England and working with others who are following up these signals and doing very rigorous studies of them, which is exactly what's needed. But getting the signals in the first place is really key. And what matters is that they're collected and handled appropriately, but it's a process that works well. Yeah. I can honestly say, being in sort of two ends of it at least.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for that, Lynn. I just thought our practical experience was helpful, but I think actually it is a system-wide response that we need. It's not just about the MHRA. It is working with clinicians. It is working with other health professionals across the wider health system. But again, this is something we'll continue to push forward as best that we possibly can. Okay, I think that probably draws us to a very positive way just to close the meeting. I'd just like to thank everyone for your contribution today. I think it's been a really broad-ranging discussion across the whole range of topics. I think it's fair to say the MHRA is working very hard to enable healthcare access and access to new medicines and new medical treatments. You know, and I think innovative licensing and access pathways is a clear example of that. You know, we've talked about patient safety almost in every presentation today, because that actually is the core of what this agency is completely about. So patient safety, top of the agenda. We've been talking about building a dynamic organisation, delivering financial sustainability. And at the end of the day, all these things come together to achieve our core purpose of protecting and improving patient health. So that's what we're here to do. That's what we'll continue to do. I'd like to thank you for your attention today. And on that happy note, I'd say I'll close the meeting and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.